rather than just show up. I think some bigger companies are trying to experiment with that, where they're saying, right, we're going to repurpose the office so the entire thing is about collaboration.
I think it makes sense.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting use of space. Plus, also, what happens when you are not using that space? So presumably, I can see a return to a WeWork type scenario, because it seems that you're not going to be full capacity all the time, and it's like cool real estate. Like, why aren't you using it?
I think that we just entered a new era that's going to be very, very exciting. Lots of work for HR.
Indeed. Good stuff for HR, I think. Okay, we're live, everybody. So welcome. Welcome, everybody, to Brainfood Live on Air. It's episode 127, and bringing it to you every Friday, as we always do. We've got a fantastic show for you today, folks. A really interesting topic. I think anybody who's looking at the top of the funnel, anybody who's looking at recruiting and diversity should be interested in this topic, because we're going to do a deep dive as to the different paths that we can take towards, I think, a goal that we all kind of share, which is trying to diversify the workforce. But how exactly do you do it? Do you use more candidate data, or do you do less? Anyway, before we kick off, obviously we have to do a quick sound check. So I just want to check whether the folks in Crowdcast, I can see about 60 of you there. If you can hear me okay, please let me know on the chat stream. Just say hello there in chat. Let me know whether the audio is fine. We should be live on LinkedIn also. I think we've been consistently live on LinkedIn, even though they're going to kick me off at some point. But if I'm on LinkedIn Live, if you can see me there, just give me a thumbs up. Let me know I'm there already. I keep getting disconnected. It says, oh, your connection is no longer valid, and I have to go and reapply for it and stuff. So it's kind of disturbing. But if you can hear me on LinkedIn and you're watching it there, please let me know. And we should be piping this into the Facebook group as well. So if you can hear me there also, please give me a thumbs up, thumbs down, some indication that audio is okay. Okay, cool. We're getting a few messages saying that's all fine. All right. So welcome everybody to the show. A quick word to our sponsors, Brick. They are trying to solve this problem, actually. This is a company that is trying to create a platform that is debiasing the recruitment aspect by focusing on personality traits, skills, rather than resume, demographic identifiers, those types of things. And you should totally check them out, brick.com. I'm going to share the link in the chat stream here so you can take a better look at them. And of course, Brick are unique because they have to do a bit of work as well as sponsor the show. We have the CEO, Markelos, is going to help me do the show today. So Markelos, welcome. How have you been?
It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm actually quite well. Happy to be here.
I'm pleased to see that. I'm pleased to see it, pleased to hear it also. And this is a really interesting topic. Great that you're involved in this, because you're coming from the vendor side trying to fix this problem with a product. So it'll be very interesting to explore this with you as well. But before we kick off into the meat of it, let's have a look at the newsletter. Oh, by the way, folks, if you're expecting the newsletter and didn't get it, it just went into everyone's spam last week. I couldn't believe it. I have no idea why that happened. I think it was a review-wide problem. I'm using review.co as a software, and they integrated with Twitter recently. I think that meant a surge of review newsletters were set up, and it basically meant that too many newsletters were going out, maybe but a few with some bad actors in there, and everyone just got slammed into spam. So look in your spam folder, fish it out, say it's not spam, so you can keep on getting the brain food. But anyway, Markelos, I think you did get it. So what was interesting if you read a few articles from last week?
I love the articles, and it's part of my mandatory reading every week. So I found really interesting this week that you had not one, but 2 articles on culture. And that's one of the topics that we really love with the customers. See, people talk about culture and they have all the different notions. And we always go back to the basics and we say, by definition, what is culture? It's the shared beliefs and values. And that's really important. And then you have this 10 things that your corporate culture needs to get right. Really great insights, because we go and we help our customers define their culture, right, and measure it. So when we go there, we see that there's always a lot of interpretation room into what the culture means. And people believe one thing, but then they realize that, yeah, I don't really expect this from my people. And what's always an eye opener is once we go and we measure culture and we look at this, it's how different what people want to have is to what they have, which is normal, by the way. If you don't have a way to measure culture, that's what you get. But these two articles also go into building culture for remote teams. And culture for remote teams is a challenge. We're a remote first team. And I'll tell you that while we hire people with at least the same beliefs, and we do that very consistently, I'm not sure we're always great into enforcing that culture and making sure that the culture stays alive, because it's a living thing, right? It's not like a document that you slap somewhere and then, oh, now that's our culture. It's all solved. So I love this article on remote working, some great ideas about what you can do, about huddles, about talking into small parties of three, just to make sure that you become a company and not just people who happen to work for the same employer.
Yep, I think you're absolutely right. Some really important points there. And they did a quite interesting how they came up with the 10 things. I think they did a Glassdoor scrape or something. So it doesn't sound like, hey, that doesn't make much sense. But if you scraped a 1.4 million handwritten reviews, and they did a kind of a word count, like a text count, to try and see what words were used more than others, to comparing different things, whether it was a positive sentiment or negative sentiment when those words were used. And then they were able to rank a little bit as to what these 10 things tended to be. And then they wrapped in, okay, if this is what the employees are saying about your company publicly, probably this is something that is important to them. This is something maybe you should have a think about how you can build. So interesting. I think the recommendations, I think, are sound as well. So definitely go check that link out. I've just shared it in the chat stream in the Crowdcast thing. Okay, give us a couple more, Markelos.
You know that my other favorite topic, and sometimes it feels that you write the newsletter for me because the topics are one after the other. So it's not like I didn't read the full thing, but these are my favorite topics. It's AI. And there's this really interactive website from Google explaining the different things about AI and how it works. I love it because there's just so much misconception. And people think that AI can do magic. But what I always say is that in all things, especially AI, the GIGO principle applies. And GIGO is not something really fancy, it's garbage in, garbage out. If you feed your AI with data that has nothing to do with whatever it is that you're trying to measure, you're never going to get someone who's super smart, right? It can only do more of what you show it. So it's really interesting for people to understand this, because sometimes we think that the AI is actually going to see correlations that no one else does. It can only work on the data that you have. My favorite example, and I won't take too much time, but I love this, is one with the horses. Have you heard about this? They did a study about an AI that was recognizing pictures. And the AI was great at recognizing pictures of the horses. And then once they looked at the data set, they said, funny, all our pictures have a byline. What happens if we take out the byline? And then there were no longer horses, because the AI from the data set was trained to learn that whatever has the specific byline is a picture of a horse. And that's one of the challenges that you have with AI. You don't understand what it learns.
Exactly, and it's basically not. It doesn't learn like a human being learns either. So it's something I think we are beginning to understand the limitations of AI a little bit more. But the post that you liked, I love this one because it was a very good, accessible piece, which I think people can use to explore. So I was actually very disappointed that we had the spam problem, because it's one of those posts I think we could really do to help uplift the industry in terms of our AI literacy, just in terms of what it is. So go and grab that link, folks. It's a brilliant website by Google. It just gives you a way to explore different concepts. Very illustrative. It's not particularly dense. Very, very accessible. But it's not like what's the word? It's not condescending either. It treats you like an adult. So, but I think anybody can read it and get better. So have a read of it. Learn a bit more about this topic. If you're in recruiting and in TA, I don't think we can cope with the level of literacy we have now and still be called future fit. We have to really upgrade our general awareness of this, because all of these technologies, foundational technologies, they definitely will be used in all of the tooling that we have. We need to be aware of what it is behind those things. Okay, give us one more, Markelos, then we'll dive into the meat of this thing.
The last favorite topic, and it's not in sequence this time around, it's about multicultural experience and being more effective leaders. And that's something that reflects very on my personal learnings. because I was born and raised in Greece, but then I had the opportunity to study in Germany. I lived in the US. I lived in Brazil for a couple of years. And when I first went to Brazil, managing people was a huge challenge for me because the culture was so completely different. But then after doing that, and it took me some time to adjust, and you can ask my reports of the time. I think I did well in the end. You have to learn through that. If you open yourself to multicultural learnings, then you understand that we all live in a bubble. Even when you're in the same country, even when people are from the same country, you're still in your own little bubble and microcosm of people that you grew up with, your whatever your social context was, and so on. So it's really important, and especially because we're going to be talking about diversity, this diversity of thought sometimes has to be, cultivated. You have to see different things to understand them. So
Yeah,
great article about that.
I think it was as well. So, for folks who didn't know, it basically is to say it was an MIT Sloan thing, which is said essentially if you're multicultural leaders, in other words, leaders that have actually worked and lived in different countries, apparently had stronger leadership skills based on more sophisticated ability to communicate with different types of people, and also basically the ability to navigate the nuances of communication because they had to do it by being a foreigner in a country. And there's no better way to learn your limitations other than being dropped into a country or a culture where you're not familiar with, and you are the one that's sticking out, and you have to rapidly learn. It's like learning learning to swim by jumping into the sea. Like, you have to learn how to do it. The pressure will make you do it, and then you will emerge from that basically a better swimmer. And that was essentially the idea behind this post. And folks, isn't that interesting? Because if we're now suddenly recruiting globally, we're now distributed, we can hire people from everywhere. All of us are international managers now. All of us are multicultural managers now. In which case, we'd have to learn a little bit from those folks that maybe have gone to different places and think about, okay, different modes of thinking, different moods, different rhythms of work, and so on and so forth. Yeah, fascinating one. Okay, let's talk about this topic, Markelos. We're going to bring our guests on shortly, but I want to just touch on your thoughts on this, because you must have thought about this when you set up Brick. I mean, this was your product is all about trying to fix this problem. So you've probably already had some thinking around this idea about what do you do with candidate data. And to give you the full context to you, Markelos, and also to everyone else, this was a curiosity to me based on my observations as to how different countries seem to be tackling the diversity problem. And some countries, I would say, were going at it from the more candidate data approach, which I would, the exemplar for this, I would say, is the United States, where you can use identification data, you can actively target people. You have people that are called diversity recruiters. That's a term that typically doesn't exist in Europe and elsewhere, but folks that are actively targeting underrepresented groups in order to diversify the pipeline. And I would say that activity very much is using more candidate data. You're trying to figure out the ethnicity, the gender, and all this type of stuff for people. But then you have some European examples. And I pick France as the exemplar for this because there's laws in France which I think prevent you from collecting this data. So you cannot actively do it in certain countries. You can't start saying this person is this ethnicity or this person is that gender, perhaps, because literally you're not allowed by law to collect that information. And so that may be a technique where it goes more to the anonymization side, which is less candidate data. Tell me about your philosophy when you were building the product, Markelos. Were you thinking about this, or was it something that wasn't quite on the horizon when you were doing the early product development for Brit?
We're constantly thinking about this. This is not just data, because everything about the candidates is what we call sensitive data. Anything that's like demographics and gender and sexual preferences and ID and so on. We still agonize about this. I don't think it's a question that's going to answer itself anytime soon. But I'll tell you our general approach to this, and it's very clear to us, and we think that we're on the right track, but I'd love to hear from the people here. And the first thing is that there is a part of the process that's all about decision making, and who's more fit for a role, and do I want this person and that. And for that, we have to be agnostic. I shouldn't let the gender or the age or any of those factors factor in, because they're not relevant to the job. So when we're trying to go and screen candidates and we get psychometrics and we may even have their demographics, we do ask them and they'll explain why. We completely ignore them. There's no way that this is going to influence my decision in saying Hung is this much of a fit for this role or Hung is great, not great, whatever. Totally agnostic there. Where we do actually need the more data is we want to see that our process is actually fair. So if I look at my whole funnel and my funnel starts and it's 60-40% women, 60% women, 40% men. Is this the ratio I want to have? Does this mirror the percentage of the population? I have to have this information to prove. And this information that my recruiter should know and say, hey, if we're getting 70% male, 30% female, this means that we're doing something wrong. We're not advertising the right places. We're not, maybe our language is not the proper one and we discourage women from applying. So what you can't measure, you can't improve. So we need to measure. We need to measure, for example, what comes to the top of funnel, as I said, because we can change our talent attraction policy. As we go down the funnel, I want to see that nothing of what I do in the funnel actually throws the balance out of whack. If I get 50-50 women and men, and then in the next stage, I only get 20% of women left. Why did that happen? Did I do something that is biased and is getting a certain type of people, a certain subgroup excluded? I want to know that. But you see that I have to separate my process and what I do in order to make decisions from how I control what I've done. If I start influencing this, it's wrong. There is no way that I should have this influence. But if I don't measure, if I don't have the data about the candidates, if I don't know how many people survived, then I don't know if my process is correct or not. If my process is biased and it prefers, I don't know, white men, very, very common example, but it's the process that biases that. If I don't measure, how will I ever know? And then I can go back into my process and see it. And what we're doing a lot of times with the candidates is that we are doing this pipeline analysis and we're saying, here's what came into your pipeline. Here's what survived this stage. Here's what survived that stage. Here's what we delivered to your hiring managers. And here's what your hiring managers chose. Because once you see that, you can see when this percentages change, right? And if that's significant. And then you can say, okay, there might be an issue here. So I'm going to go and address it. I'm going to go and address the phone interview, or I'm going to go and talk to my hiring managers, because my hiring managers, obviously, I do deliver them the proper funnel. These are all equally qualified candidates and they have everything that we need to. But then they keep hiring only women. There's a bias, obviously, within my hiring managers. So there, I can't remove the human element. There's no way I can have decisions that are fully automated. This would be wrong on so many levels. So that's what it does. I keep saying the same thing, but you do the process, you do the control.
I think I understand. And that's actually an interesting innovation, which maybe I didn't think about when I posed the question as a binary opposite, the choice between two, but maybe you should do them both. It's just the sequence as to when you do them. And it's a tandem approach. So you got to collect the information if you can, because you've got to understand at the very top of the funnel, are you getting a representative sample of people into your funnel? By the way, this is not necessarily just a population wide. This is about the number of engineers, let's say, within a certain demographic. You can say, look, we need to get that kind of percentage in our pipeline. But when it comes to decision making, going through the process, that's when it should be masked. Or you need to find a way where other bits of information are elevated ahead of the demographic data. So we almost have, as recruiters, we almost have to play a role of being able to manage the sort of information in the system. We can't just allow all information in regardless. We have to cultivate it and kind of curate it a little bit. And then when it goes to the hiring managers, we then need to make sure they're getting unbiased information, or not allowing bias, sort of information that would promote bias to get into that pipe.
That's very correct. And the way how we solve this, and unfortunately not everyone is using us yet, but you should look at your solution if it has something similar, is that we make all the job-related information available to everyone who's in the hiring loop. So recruiters and hiring manager can see all the skills and personality and all those things that are related, all the different indexes, and to what extent someone is a culture add or not. But all the demographic data, we actually don't expose on an individual level. We only expose on an aggregate, and only when we have a certain amount of candidates in the position. Because if I have 2 candidates and I expose demographics, it's going to be very clear who's who, right? So once we have 6 people or above, we're starting to show demographics, and then you can see, okay, here was what's my funnel was, and I can probably follow it up to a certain level. After that level, it drops off because I simply don't have enough candidates there to see what's happening.
Yeah. I think that's just the mindset we've got to do. Luke has said it absolutely correctly in the chat as well. It's like the recruiters are responsible for making the process fair and supporting the hiring managers in doing this. Like, you can't put it on the hiring managers. They need to be trained and educated like everyone else does, but it's our responsibility to construct the recruiting flow so that they get the best opportunity to make the best decision. Okay, let's bring on some of our guests here because we should be, I'm excited to know from these folks, particularly from a kind of operational recruiter perspective. So I'm going to bring on Guillaume Alexandre and Utenea first. And then we'll bring on Caroline and Irina later. Oh, there's Guillaume. How are you doing, Guillaume?
I'm good, you?
Guillaume, you look fantastic, man. Have you been like getting fit or something?
A little bit, yes.
Absolutely. You look in terrific shape, dude.
I'm psyched.
Anyway, indeed. And there's Uta. How are you doing, Uta?
I'm good. Sun is shining. Topic is cool, so I'm good.
I can see you both there. Okay, so for the folks who don't know you, and you're both like super famous people, at least in the European scene, but for the folks who don't know you, can you quickly introduce yourself? Guillaume, you go first.
Okay, so my name is Guillaume. I am French. I'm a sourcer. Okay, so my job is to convert people into candidates. I work with internal recruiters to do the sourcing for them for super hard to find positions. I also train people. I also have, for everybody who is interested in tools, go to freesourcingtools.com because I've given all my tools out, well, most of my tools out to the community. Simple, Google me, you'll find me, and you'll see what I do.
There he is. And Guillaume's is a superstar sourcer, one of the best, I think, in the business. Uta, for the people who don't know you, can you quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, you can also Google me. And so I have now the opportunity to say I have a totally new job. I'm now responsible for senior recruitment evangelism in Indeed. But before, I was head of global talent acquisition for Telecom. So my heart beats really for recruiting, for a good recruiting process, and as well for the diversity topic, because I'm a great supporter for STEM activities, especially for women. But I have to say the gender topic in the moment, it's a little bit too hot. I would like to come back to the whole diversity topic because it's so important that we look on every space here. So that's me. But yeah, go on LinkedIn, go everywhere. You will find me as well, and based in Germany.
I've just shared the LinkedIn of both these folks, so go ahead and connect with them. Okay, let's deal with this topic. I've come up with a bunch of presumptions, and I've made presumptions based on my knowledge of sort of local laws and jurisdictions and stuff like this. And I assume that, okay, in France, you correct me if I'm wrong, actually, Guillaume, is like there's certain restrictions of the sort of data you can collect on candidates with the perception that, you have to debias it right from the beginning. Is that correct or not?
No, you don't have to debias this in terms of you don't have to blind CVs or anything. You just don't have the right to collect any type, as far as I know. You don't have the right to collect and to do analysis of anything regarding ethnicity or things like that. Like, you cannot know, like, out of my pipeline, I've got that many people coming from North Africa, that many people coming from France. Like, everybody has to be considered equal. And as far as I know, no, you cannot even aggregate the data to understand how many people have applied and where they come from and based on their first names or anything.
So just to understand this, like, it's not possible to put on a demographic checkbox at the end of an application thing to say, look, check this if you're Chinese or if you're Indian. You can't do this.
I've never seen it, and I think it's definitely illegal. Yes.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. And is that the case in Germany as well, Uta? How does it work? Or is it a little bit more you can collect this information?
We can collect this information, but we have also this case that if we have less than 5 candidates, so we have also to start the things because it's personal data. But for me, it's the topic of diversity starts not is if we are collecting and know then in the end of the tunnel what we was doing wrong. For me, it starts with if we really have the recruiters on board, they understand as a consultant how really to use a talent pipeline and how the labor market looks like, because you have to start with the beginning of the tunnel really to diversify your landscape.
Right. So what you're saying is, look, you can do it. We may be looking at in the wrong end of the telescope, so to speak. You need to go back to the core, which is education on the recruiter side, education on the hiring manager side, doing all of those things. Otherwise, you might just be putting, loads of great candidates into the pipe and then just getting them slapped away. Guillaume, you're about to say something?
Yeah, I'm just saying, I don't think if you ask any recruiter anywhere on the planet and you ask them, do you want to discriminate? The answer is going to be yes. The thing is, for me, people are not people. They're data at that point. When you meet them, when you get to know them, when you've got information about them, they become people. But before that, they're just raw data. And when you're facing raw data, you have to make, and I think recruiters are one of the professions that have to make so many decisions a day, is yes or no. But this is based also on CV design. How do people write what they talk about? Lots of different things. And the problem is that then within the whole recruitment process, you start with biases straight from the start. And because you've got so many biases there already, how do you solve that problem if the input is not clean? And as you were saying, garbage in, garbage out. And when you have the data that is very hard to aggregate, that is different, that is declarative from people, how do you actually are even able to, why do you take a decision? Why do you like someone or not based on a CV? That's still something that I don't understand. That's why I'm a sourcer and not a recruiter.
Yeah. Can I reflect on that? Because Guillaume, I think especially you as sourcer, you're highly dependent on the request that comes. And if we start really from the top, so meaning a hiring manager refers to, I want to have this and this person with this and this skills, but it has to become from this social class with this degrees and something like this one. This is the first momentum where we have to start to say no. There can be no social class in, there can be no degree inflation in, and so on and so on. Because then we already start to influence to get the bias out of the mind. Because it starts with them. Because they have an idea what they are looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, they start with already knowing what they want. But when they want a PhD, they want a PhD. How can I challenge that? You see what I mean? They want a PhD in polymers I've been doing lately. They want a PhD, and you have to do with whatever gets. And if there is no PhD, they will not consider. Yeah. So
I think,
as a source, I do a lot of diversity, but the only diversity I can do is gender. Is if you start the funnel, and my job is to rebalance funnels. If you've got 8 guys applying and 2 girls, how about we go actively sourcing 6 girls, and that way you start with 8 and let the best person win. That I can do, but that's actually the kind of only diversity that I can do kind of at scale. And then there are so many diversities, I don't know, neurodiversity, sexual orientations, etc. It's just impossible to identify even from the data. So you can only do what you can do as a sourcer.
Okay, so I think what's important here is that your role in the recruiting funnel actually will determine what can be done, right? So especially so from your side, Guillaume, you're very much at the sharp edge of it. You're speaking to candidates, you're identifying candidates. You're going to be bound a lot by the customer instruction, whether that's a hiring manager or a client or whatever. There's a limitation to how much you can negotiate and influence that. Whereas Ute, you're kind of being a senior leader right at the top for a big company. Your role is actually to influence the hiring managers. That's the purpose of it. So we need to also understand then we have different responsibilities maybe in terms of the kind of role we perform within the recruiting cycle. If your job is to like hammer through and deliver this against this role, then perhaps the conversation should have happened or needs to have happened way back earlier, perhaps by somebody else, because it may not be you doing all of this. Okay, super interesting on this. I want to stay with France just a little bit, and maybe even Germany. I'm not sure whether the two things are the same, but in France, you actually also have pictures on the resume, correct, Guillaume? So that's a really interesting one, because on the one hand, you cannot collect sort of ethnicity data, for instance, but if the expectation is there's a photo on the resume, so you could eyeball it, I guess. I mean,
you could. Officially, then using a system and AI to just from the picture to know where they come from, that's not legal. Okay, but yes, you've got pictures, you've got locations, so you know that people coming from some parts of less privileged outside Paris or anything like that, you could do that. Yeah, you've got all this information straight on the CV.
So I heard this from, actually, maybe it was Morgane. She was like, she's in this chat right now. She mentioned to me that there is implicit data that a local recruiter might be able to know, and you'll be able to kind of tap into a talent pool based on postcode, for instance. You might be able to say, you know what, in this part of Paris, it's likely to be massively ethnically diverse, simply because we know where sort of what the economic situation is there. So if you're hiring and you need to, create some ethnic diversity in the pipeline, doing like a postcode search might be a useful technique. So there's all kinds of weird implicit stuff. But that kind of got me thinking, isn't that kind of like a really dumb way to do it? Shouldn't we just be like very explicit, make it easier for recruiters to go out and do that? Or do you think the French position actually has some ethical value in trying to anonymize at the early stage?
I think what they intend to do compared to the actual outcome is two different things. If you look at, the Europass CVs, have you ever been facing a Europass CV that Italians use a lot?
Not a great example, right? I mean, I don't like any resume, but that's one I don't like.
They are awful. Like read, and the thing is, I'm going back to the individual, the recruiter, who is going to have to read them. Read 100 of them in a day, you die. Honestly, it's awful.
It's a fatal commitment.
Has it happened? Do we have a name of someone?
But it's impossible. So I know recruiters that when they have, because you develop such an aversion towards Europass CVs, somebody who actually applies with a Europass CVs, you don't even want to look at them because they are awful to read. You see what I mean? So you are discriminating based on a CV that is made to avoid discrimination. Because that's the whole point of the Europass CV, that everybody will have the exact same template and that we will just judge on what people write.
Yeah, it's a very good point. So it's failed to understand there's a human reader involved.
I have a question though on CVs, if I may. So, people are represented by their resume, and there are a ton of, some really great, some not so great, resume writers out there. So once you get the resume of a candidate, do you know if that's the candidate, and then you can judge how well he or she formatted it and whatnot? Or do you say, okay, this is a person who was clever enough to spend $100 or 90 euros or whatever, and they have now a really cool looking CV that actually stands out? How do you deal with that?
You don't. Honestly, you don't. I don't think recruiters, if you're really honest, I don't think they have. They're dealing with what, 10, 15, 20, 30 positions at a time. Okay, they're getting on each positions 100 profiles, 150 profiles, or sometimes none, whatever. But they are flooded with CVs all day long. They are getting harassed by hiring managers. They've got KPIs, they've got everything. Like, let's be honest, do they really take the time to think, has this person spent money to get a resume writer? Or even more, like, I know so many companies where they are so attractive. Okay, I know Swiss luxury goods companies one online marketing job, 1 week on LinkedIn, 3,500 profiles apply. What do you do when you have 3,500 applicants? Well, it's easy. Either somebody from the company says, that's my cousin, hire, because just put the CV on top of the pile because I don't want to go through them. Or you give that to the trainee in HR and say, well, try and read through them, and they've got no experience whatsoever, because you cannot physically spend the time to read 3,500 CVs. Or you just look at the first 50 and you've got enough. So you're discriminating also by the fact that you're not even giving a chance to the people who have taken the time to apply or who have applied after the second day. So we're not trying to fix a system that was working before. It was already broken. Okay. We're just trying at some point to be, and I think education of recruiters and saying, I need to be diverse. It's my duty to be diverse. No matter what the hiring manager says, my duty towards the company and society in general is to be diverse. And I'm going to try to say, you know what? I'm going to try to find myself some diverse CVs and add them to the pile. That way, we've got a balanced funnel. I think, right. But I don't know if technology can do that based on the fact that you've got raw data in that can be written by the resume writer, etc., and therefore you could hack the thing. Okay, that the system learns from that every single AI would learn from all the mistakes that have been done in the past. So you cannot trust a system that has been learning from mistakes. You could trust a system that has been learning from perfect data, and then you trust. Okay.
But you're talking about perfect data. I think that there is a consensus that a resume is in no way representative of the candidate. Yes. You cannot make good hiring decisions out of the resume. So no matter how hard we try, no matter how many people will put on it, this is not the way to fix this. As long as you're looking at the resume, whether it's 50 or 3,500, you're not going to do it right. Which begs the question, and I know the solution that we're offering, but I'm not going to sell just yet. I want to hear what people are saying. We opened the content writer position. We're a fantastic startup that does HR, but we're not as famous as your sweet luxury provider. We got 2,300 resumes. Yep. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that and say, we're still a great provider, we're still looking at the right people, and the person we hired, we're super happy about them because they're probably one of the better ones from the 2,300.
Let me just say this one thing, everybody. I mean, ultimately, recruiting is about when you stop. It's called optimal stopping. You will end up stopping the effort when you think you've got enough candidates to make the hire. You don't go to the entire planet's worth of potential resources in order to get absolutely the right person. So from an ethical point of view, we also need to put pragmatism on top of this. We cannot get a 100% absolutely fair system, because a 100% absolutely fair system would involve screening the entire planet's worth of possible candidates. That would be the fairest way to do it. But it would take, obviously, forever to do. We cannot practically do it. We have to put a number on it in terms of the amount of effort we can spend. So the experience a lot of people had, maybe not so much these days when obviously candidate shortage, but for certain roles like the marketing role, or certainly 12 months ago, we remember very well, massive flood of candidates coming through. Like there's an optimal stopping scenario right there. You can't go through 1,000 CVs, not even the intern. Your brain will start frying. I mean, I think there's data, there's good research to suggest that after the 7th thing that you see that's the same, you just end up clicking next. Because you want to get through the damn thing. You just want it over. It's like already blasting your mind. So there is a concept, I think, where we say what is practically doable. And that, unfortunately, is going to edge and is it'll rub against perfect fairness, I'm afraid to say. Ute, you're going to disagree with me, so go ahead.
No, I'm not disagree, but we're talking now to have too many candidates and so on and so on. And to be honest, candidate shortage, we have sometimes too less candidate, especially for women, especially for technical roles and something like this one. If we have such a special case for marketing with a lot of applicants, why not bringing tests into it? Why not doing assessment into it? Self-assessment, self-testing to shorten the big things that you have to screen. We're always looking, it needs to be done always from humans, yes, of course, in the end, but maybe there are also some steps that automate help us between. And in the end of the day, I'm not sure if we always can say there is always a bias and always a diversity topic into it. We have really to train our recruiters, that I'm totally agree with Guillaume, but I start one topic earlier. We have to train especially our hiring managers that we don't hire penguins in the same row, that we hire different people to disrupt, to be more innovative, to be really resilient for the future.
Yeah, fantastic. Folks, let's leave it at this point. I want to thank Guillaume and Ute for coming on and giving us your input. Please stay with us for the rest of the show. We're going to try and answer some questions. By the way, folks, if anybody's got any questions for all of our guests, please use the ask a question function at the bottom of the screen. We're going to get to them in a moment. Actually, before we let you go, you two, can you give us just one bit of advice to recruiters who are thinking about this? We want to diversify the pipeline. Guillaume, can you just reiterate some of the things that you mentioned, like the need for the recruiters maybe to take personal action to rebalance it? How would you kind of, would you mind repeating what you sort of that concept?
The way I approach intake meetings and briefings is critical. Is when I do a briefing for sourcing, I need to know what I'm looking for. Okay. So I need to narrow it down to what I want, okay? And once I've got the persona, then I ask very specifically to the hiring manager, you've told me what you want. Now, for the sake of diversity, what can I take off? Where can we look? What can we get rid of? And how can we broaden our minds, okay? That way, we are going to do a good job, okay? But as a sourcer, I need to know what I'm looking for. There are 776 million profiles on LinkedIn nowadays. So if I don't know what I'm looking for, and if I need somebody creative, there is nobody on the planet that I ask, are you creative and team player? That's going to tell me no. All right. Simple as that. So I need to know exactly what I'm looking for. And once I know exactly what I'm looking for, based on that persona, I need to ask, okay, for diversity, what can we do? Okay. And then look at those diverse personas and therefore create 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 diverse personas based on one basic persona. That's how I approach it myself, because I need to narrow down for sourcing and then I broaden up for diversity.
Yeah, I see the motion of what you're trying to do, because the sourcer does have a kind of almost a selfish obligation also. Like, you need to know what the hiring manager is thinking, because you're there to try and deliver against this requirement. And if you don't have this, then ultimately you're going to end up disappointing that manager, and you're wasting a huge amount of time. Whether that's you being an agency supplier or you being a service provider internally, that's still a dynamic that needs to happen. Okay, go to you finally with a comment. Ute, what would you suggest? How do we kind of handle this idea of, do we take more data, less data to diversify the candidate pipeline?
I'm for more data, so I only can say in that one. So I'm always for more data, but I really like Guillaume's statement, because he said something what was very critical. He asked questions instead of only nogging what somebody said to us. He asked questions, and if we start with that one, also in the recruiting mindset, ask ourselves if we have a bias. Maybe we don't aware of that. Please make you aware of that. Ask questions, but also challenge your hiring managers during the whole process, what we are doing and why we are doing that. Don't accept an order. Ask questions.
Yeah, we need to elevate the relationship for sure, because without that, we're just going to keep cascading the challenge down. Okay, guys, brilliant. Let you two go. Thank you so much for joining us, folks.
Thanks. It was a pleasure.
Oh, sorry, I cut Guillaume off. Ute, good to see you. I'll catch up with you soon.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Ooh, there we go. We got to move quickly on because I realize how far behind we are in terms of time. So let's bring on Caroline straight away. And we'll also
It's
bring
an
on
exciting
Irina.
discussion, and you see
It
how
is.
passionate people are about it. And I am holding myself back because the guests have some great opinions, and it's great to hear from the recruiters themselves what they're thinking.
Well, 100%. I think we can speculate on the sideline, but very interesting to see what active recruiters are doing. But also, diversity experts also, and we have one right here. This is Caroline Chevier. Caroline, how are you?
I'm doing good, and I'm super happy to be with you today.
Great to see you. For the folks who don't know you, Caroline, can you introduce yourself, like who you are, what it is you do?
Yeah, sure. I've been a tech recruiter for the last 10 years, mostly in the tech industry. I also got a specialization in anything related to AI. So I really enjoyed your conversation around the algorithmic issues. And I recently founded my own company. So we hire engineers, VP engineers. We work on diversity, equity, and inclusion topics. And I also coach underrepresented senior engineers. And I work with Morgan that you mentioned earlier.
You know what I have to say? When I was asking to assemble this panel, 3 people mentioned your name, Caroline, as someone who needed to be on here independently. And in the end, I thought, okay, this needs to happen. So I'm very pleased to have you here. Okay, let's deal with this problem about data. How do you handle this situation where there are some obstructions for the ability to collect the information? But you also need to do it in order to make sure there's enough of the population in the pipeline in order for candidates to have a chance. How do you kind of advise companies to deal with this? What's your approach, Caroline?
So you mentioned it earlier, but France in the landscape is very peculiar in terms of the legal limitations. But you have ways around. Basically, you can use and collect data based on self-declaration. So for instance, from the very early stage of your hiring pipeline, you can invite candidates, for instance, to share their gender identity. And it can be a way for you to collect information about them in that way. But if you do it, be careful. Don't only collect the male, female, or non-binary gender identity, because it's not enough. So this is a way of doing it, self-declaration. And I can give you a very pragmatic example. When companies want to tackle diversity and inclusion topics, they often lead internal surveys. And they're going to invite their employees to, if they want to, say if they are on the LGBT spectrum, say if they self-declare themselves Black, Arabic, Asian, and so on. And in France, you have a very sensitive topic related to religion. But, we always say, you can't be what you can't see. You can't fix what you can't measure. So if you want to work on diversity topics, you need to measure underrepresented folks. And if you want to improve diversity, you need to be able to show, to display, thanks to the data, the discrimination faced by underrepresented folks. So to sum up, self-declaration and also internal initiatives. And we have a good news because in the following month, we are going to get, there used to be an equality index for companies to respect. And soon there will be a diversity index, which might enable companies and therefore recruiters and sources to collect ethnical data, geographical data. So it might be an extremely positive move forward in that regard.
That's really interesting. Sometimes when you have a national law or you have some initiative at that level, it empowers the recruiter to have the internal conversation, doesn't it? Because you may actually be struggling internally. You get the sense maybe this is, they don't want you to think about that. But when a big law comes out at the top, you can say, hey, listen, for us to be compliant and aligned with where we're going, we need to do this. And it gives you a little bit more oomph,
I can give you a very pragmatic example. 10 years ago, there was a law called the Loi Koppe-Zimmermann. It's the name of two national deputies. And they enforced a law which invited companies to have at least 40% women in their administrative boards. So this law was passed in 2009, and the representation of women in administrative board was below 10%. 10 years later, because if you're not complying, you could get fined. 10 years later, France is leading the way in Europe with a 40% women representation in boards. So we went from below 10 to 42%. And in the same moment, Germany, so I'm sad Ute had to go, but in Germany, at the same time, they refused to set up what we would describe as quota, which is a name I hate. I prefer talking about objectives, about measurement. Quota, it's like you're forced to do it, but you don't want to do it. So basically, Germany said, no, we're not going to do it. And right now, they realized they didn't improve the women representation, and they are going to do the same as France. So data, measurement is like as if you were taking a picture. If you don't see your progress, you cannot see that you did right. And in the reverse, if you didn't take a picture, you don't know you suck.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing example, Caroline. So thank you for sharing that with us and delivering it in such a way that is so accessible for us to visualize. I think you're right. A lot of people are scared with the number. I think this in particular in the US, this is a huge conversation. So US folks, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong on this. I'm speculating on countries I don't even live in, so I don't know. But I'm just reading what you say, and it looks like there's a movement for quota, there's a movement against quota. I know we don't want to use the term, but sometimes that is being used out there, and it becomes politically very divisive. But it may be a case that you need to have some numbers in there just to measure your progress, and it may not necessarily need to be even a legal mandate. Even the publication of the information itself causes the pressure to work in your favor. It's almost like a publishing being forced to publish some data about your pay packet or your whatever it might be. It just kind of forces you as a business to think about it rather than shove it under the carpet and say, okay, that's done, let's do whatever. So I do understand what you're saying. What are your thoughts on those countries or those cultures that have had hard quotas? But oftentimes when you speak to recruiters in those places, they will report actually the significant issues that have emerged from this action. So for instance, in fact, there's loads of examples. You can go to South Africa, for instance, and look at the experience there where there's hard quotas in terms of different tiers of management and even ownership at board. You can go to anywhere in the Middle East. They will tell you, okay, we have a native population quota. And again, you create all kinds of different recruiting challenges, which seem to be like, I would say, what is the word? Overly prominent as a problem that really separates out the job of recruiting and even from the business. Any thoughts on that as these examples, Caroline?
Yeah. It's quite hard to have a universal answer to this question because I think we have a responsibility, as Markellos mentioned, not to ignore the cultural specificities of a country, of a region. However, I really believe that we need to have measurable objectives when we do diversity sourcing or when we source in general. But this is not the right issue to address. You can provide as much underrepresented folks as you want if you're hiring managers, if the interviewers that are biased, you will not succeed. Basically, you will do stuff for nothing. So you need to strengthen, to enforce a strong collaboration between sources, recruiters, and hiring managers. And I would also advise to add a notion of proportionality, because Markellos mentioned it as well. You're not going to invent or to create underrepresented folks in specific jobs. So you need to be like, okay, I think I can source at least 30% of Black people, because you know this is approximately the representation in the field. And then you can add an extra spark. You're like, okay, there are 30%, I'm going to go for 40. And then the year after, I'm going to go for 50. Because the more diversity you have, the more you attract it. So this is what I would do, step by step, extra spark, extra effort when you know the proportion. But sometimes creating unreachable objectives is completely discouraging for everyone.
Right, 100%. And also, I think it can be very intimidating for a lot of businesses. Like I kind of, you look at certain industry sectors, for instance, that are just historically have been overwhelmingly dominated by a certain type of person. And if you kind of layer on exactly the same diversity measures that you might do for an office-based business in a big city where there's different sort of ethnicities and different sort of demographics, it's not going to be fair. Because you don't have the same access to the talent pool. So I guess things like talent intelligence are going to come into this in a bigger way, aren't they? Where your understanding of population data is going to be very informative as to how you set up your measurements. As you say, you need to kind of how do you say it? You say everything better than I do, Caroline. But it was almost like what is it? Proportionality. So that is based on location of job. If we're still caring about location, we'll talk about remote in a second, by the way. So location of job, but also where it sits within the economy and the relationship with the numbers of people that actually do it. And there should be data around that. There should be national data that carries that. But even if there isn't, maybe this is where the talent intelligence function needs to emerge a bit more, where you have specialists that would look at this demographic data and be able to present you some options or some information to help you create these numbers.
I'm on board. Every time I do a job briefing for a VP role, for instance, the clients say to me, I want a female. I'm like, yeah, you want a female lady VP role? There are less than 5% of them. So what do we do about it? And bringing this knowledge, it's empowering everyone. And so sometimes you realize that possibly you're going to adapt your recruitment experience. Possibly you're going to look for underrepresented folks in general, not just one minority. And I would like to share a story, because diversity sourcing is all about people at the end of the day, and about discrimination. The other day I was chatting with a Black female data scientist. So we're all about intersectionality here. And basically she sent thousands of applications, or I'm exaggerating, it was more than 100. It was 102. And she was tired because she didn't land any job. And so she created, based on the same background, the same diploma, 2 other LinkedIn profiles. One for a white lady and the second one for a white man. Guess what? Out of the 3 of them, the white man was the one who was the most contacted. So what she did, she answered from the male candidate profile to recruiters saying, hey, you know what? I'm not available, but this person
This lady is smart. Yeah,
and
amazing.
52% of the recruiters answered to this lady, and they answered, wait for it. Sorry, you got recommended by this person, but the job is not open anymore. And 48% of the others didn't even bother to reach out to her. So
that's super interesting.
When I got this precise data, I was like, we need to seriously question our practices, because she's talented, she got the skills, but she is a Black lady. And even if you hide the picture on the resume, you're going to meet her in the real life, and you're not going to put away the unconscious bias.
Do you know what, Caroline? The second half of that story surprised me, because I was thinking that there would be a happy ending here.
Nope.
That her technique would actually result in some great conversions and so on. Because I'm very sympathetic to recruiters. I used to be a recruiter. I still think this way, and I understand the sort of the thought process that you have to do. Because when you're recruiting at speed, which we are doing, We're giving a 3-second chance of every candidate. No one's reading a CV. Let's face facts. You're scanning super quick and you're making a yes/no decision as to whether you will revisit that later. And over the vast majority of the time, you're knowing most candidates. And you're looking for reasons to knock them out because you're trying to convert 100 CVs into 10. And that's what you're doing. So I was hoping for a better outcome for your contact there. There is more. Okay,
she got a job after that.
Finish the story. How did she get this job, Caroline?
Basically, I built a LinkedIn post introducing her skills and completely anonymizing her, and then several recruiters jumped in and she landed a job afterwards.
Yeah, so you had to actually take action and you amplify her a little bit on your own action.
Yeah.
Well, that's very good of you to do that, Caroline. I think that's awesome. But obviously, as you mentioned, there's a cultural problem in terms of how recruiters are behaving with this. And I do wonder, why that decision was made for them not to pursue or to continue.
You know what? I'm going to make Markelos smile. I always say that recruiters are like algorithms. If they are fed with bad features, they are going to deliver bad results. And to answer your remark, Hung, it's not just recruiters who are going to be blamed in that story. It's a whole system. Because recruiters embody sometimes, the criteria of the hiring managers. They optimize the time of everyone. And so if we can find a solution between that, and this is how we're going to fix things, when we're going to be like, you know what? Yes, a Black lady, a data scientist can actually be excellent at the job.
Not only so, but these days I would imagine should be a hot candidate. I mean, I'm kind of mystified by this. Markelos, you about to say something?
I would argue that being a Black lady shouldn't matter. Being a data scientist is what matters. And really, to all of the things that we discussed, the solution is always going to be the same. How can I ignore the things that don't matter, and I can concentrate on, does this person have the things that I need them for to do the job? Unfortunately, we can't have extensive job tests for everyone. And even then, you still have culture and this and that. But really, we do this a lot. We look at the basics. We match people based on what's going to be successful. And we're not the only solution out there. All I'm saying is that, sure, go buy Brick, it's the best. But find solutions that can help you narrow down. And what they're actually going to do is they're not going to replace recruiters. This is always going to be wrong. But they're going to empower them. They're going to give them the data to say, okay, from this 100 people that applied, these seem to be the ones that are best fitted for being a data scientist. And then I'm going to look at the resume, and some of them are going to be Black, some of them are going to be women. But who cares? Once I start feeding the right candidates into the pool, then we go into the matter of training people. And I think we have this topic next week, right, Hung, which is about this. Can we train bias away? Super long discussion.
Yeah. Next week, by the way, if you're interested in it's kind of a part 2, but we're talking about unconscious bias from a psychology perspective. So I've got a bunch of psychologists joining us. What I want to do with that topic is to ask the question, what is unconscious bias? Why is it there? Because it's there for a reason. What is the evolutionary journey that's got us to this point? And is it possible to unlearn it? Because it may be a case that I've read some studies to say actually trying to do bias training might be counterproductive in certain contexts, like people resist it and they end up not sort of actually changing behaviors, maybe even doubling down on what they were doing before. So yeah, definitely follow the channel if you want to get hold of that topic. Caroline, I think you want to say something on this?
Yeah, I wanted to say that we can't say, I don't see color, I don't see gender, I don't see your sexual orientation. This is not possible because actually we do. And when we look at the data, we see a difference. I'm going to give you an example. In France, when you have a Northern African sounding name, you have minus 20% chances of getting contacted when you apply to a job. And when you do a spontaneous application, it's minus 30%. So you can't fix the system if you don't understand its biases. And we're not talking about an invisible and unincarnated system. We're talking about people. And so we need to start with people and then empowering them with a tool that is not going to use our historical data based on our biased historical behaviors and thinking. This is what I'm going to say.
Do you know what I think is a powerful thing, Caroline? So going on to this idea of training, I think it's about bad training. It has that impact, right? Whereas I think you can do good training. And the good training is actually those kind of examples that you cited, because I'm now reminded of a friend of mine, Egyptian, a lady, Hind. I hope she's watching this, but she actually did change her name in order. She basically made an Anglo name, which, by the way, it's totally legal in the UK to do. You can call yourself anything you want without going to deep hole. You can actually do this in the UK, so it's not a crime. But that basically made all the difference. It was all about getting past that 3-second yes/no decision that a recruiter is going to screen past and skip over a name that they don't recognize or a name that they will assume carries connotations. And the connotations might be whatever they may be, based on whatever the media might tell you, or based on, your maybe some prior experience you might have, or whatever it is. It's irrelevant to that particular individual. Okay, listen, folks, I've been trying to get on Irina, but I'm afraid to say I can't actually get her on to the show. I can see it's saying that she's trying to accept the invitation, but I'm not being able to. Irina, if you're watching this, I wonder whether you've probably got some like crazy plugins on Chrome or something, because you're like a super saucer. And I wonder whether that's interfering. Oh, there she is. Oh my God. By the power of words over the internet, we managed to make it work. I couldn't believe it. I've been inviting you for the last 10 minutes.
Sorry.
Irina.
Yeah.
Great to see you. I don't think there's anybody in the business that doesn't know who you are, but I wonder whether you could quickly introduce yourself, who you are and what it is you do.
Well, I'm a sourcer. About half of my time I source for clients. Sometimes it's full-time recruiting, but mostly it's sourcing projects when we generate lists of matching candidates. And the other half I teach together with David Galley. And over the last year, we have been teaching the diversity sourcing training and certification program. Every month, it will be our 12th presentation in October. Every time it was sold out. And among my sourcing requests, some are diversity, so I'm very plugged into the topic, mostly from the Northern America point of view, but we have had requests from Europe as well.
Right. Well, Irina, I want to talk about the North American point of view, because we've spent a lot of time talking about our European challenges, but a big stimulus for this idea of a conversation was that actually we're trying to tackle the diversity challenge with different techniques and even different value systems. So can you explain what the kind of requests that you've been getting and the kind of, your knowledge of how diversity recruiting or attempts to diversify the pipeline works in the US? And what you've been sort of asked to do as a deliverer of those services.
Right. So there is no, on LinkedIn, there is no diversity filter. And on most systems, there isn't. So we have to do things that will lead us to diversity candidates. So one of these things is simply searching in images. Let me show you something.
Are you going to share a screen for us, Irina?
No, I'll share a link. Hold on.
Okay, fine. I was about to, risk something in there. So God, I didn't have to
So
do that.
here is a link. So I'm searching for CDOs worldwide in images, in faces, and look who we get, right?
Whoa.
Or you can replace CDO with any company name and any title. And the higher the titles get, the more technical they get, the fewer women we see, and the fewer diversity people we see, right? So you can search using images, but you can also assess what the picture is like here. the ways that we teach are, okay, here are diversity categories: women in the US, African American, Latino, Hispanic, LGBTQ, disability. We've been asked to teach about neurodiversity. And all we can do is to find diversity indicators. For women, it would be she, her, added to the profile. Women's names is an excellent filter. I've measured it, and if we get 1,000 common names for women in the US and the UK, we will be getting close to 90% of women candidates by that. And we have to do that if we're searching for a CTO like that. I mean, I would be spending hours and hours just rejecting the white male candidates. But so it is pronouns, it could be names, it could be schools, all women's schools or diversity schools, it could be associations. If you search by an ethnicity name, you will be finding people who belong to relevant organizations. But I must say that it is somewhat broken. Diversity means any diversity. And I'm being asked to search, say, for women, African Americans, and Latino. Uh, Chinese and Indian candidates are not diversity. So if I'm looking just by my input, I'm sitting there and I'm rejecting, white men, pass, Indian men, pass, Chinese men, pass, and so forth, which is pretty bizarre if you think about it.
Right.
So I've never
And
been
just
asked to search for older candidates, never. And I must say that this is the discrimination point. I mean, people who are older cannot get jobs. And then it
Irina, I
goes
was
into
I was about to mention exactly this. Like we talked about ageism, I think last week, and when you're talking about, let's say we're skipping, let's say white men. I mean, okay, that's a big category of people, but that also means there's a huge cohort of older worker that literally are being skipped over because they're perceived to be part of the majority group, let's say. But they may be out of work like forever. That's it. It's like,
absolutely. And then we land in a reality where white men have a hard time getting a job, where women get higher salaries here in the Bay Area. So it is a very complex environment. And what we teach in the program, what we do in practice, is using these diversity filters. We're not talking about any biases or anything. We are looking for candidates who are diverse. And I agree that after we have done the pipeline, after that, we're not looking at anybody diverse or not. We're interviewing candidates. We just make sure that diverse candidates are included in the, we have reached out to them.
So what you're saying is essentially, if you fix sourcing and then you have a right process, then you're probably going to do pretty well. Am I
Yes,
getting this
sourcing
right?
is not that only. Of course, the company needs to welcome diversity. The company needs to have the branding that incorporates that. They need to establish a culture welcoming diversity. And I'm living in the Bay Area. It's as diverse as you get it. My son went to a school where they had 12% white kids, and my son is adopted, so we're diverse ourselves. Uh, so we're doing what we can do, but I think we're failing in the sense that we're not including every type of diversity. And we're doing too
right.
much to push diverse candidates at the expense of rejecting other candidates. I worked with a recruiting manager, and I was submitting candidates. Now she says, I already have a woman. Now only submit African Americans. Like, hello, where is diversity here? This is discrimination, not diversity, right?
But this is part of the ethics of this approach, because a big part of the reason why I had sympathy with the blind approach is because if you're doing active targeting, that seems to me like, okay, it's a proactive approach, as Luke said in the chat commentary there, but that can easily segue into discrimination when you're ruling out certain populations completely based
Yep.
on a discriminatory action. And from the from the hiring manager's point of view, even though her position, I think it was her you mentioned, Irene, even her position, I think we would find to be reprehensible. I think it's still understandable, because if she's being given a pressure, public pressure, we talked about that before, Caroline, right? It's effective in this. But if she feels the pressure, right, I need to, represent this diversity, then perhaps she's actually hiring purely to get that offer back rather than any other purpose. That becomes the primary driver, which is actually one of the problems with quotas, and one of the critics of having a quota system is for this purpose, whether the quota is explicit or implicit.
Sure.
Yeah, interesting.
And then, we cannot stay anonymous. Come on, there's the internet, right? There are pictures on LinkedIn profiles. You can identify men, women, ethnic people. How do you hide that from yourself, right?
But I think,
and then
you can
how
kick
do
it
you
down
know
the
you're
road,
good
though,
if you don't measure it?
You can kick it down the road. I mean, I think ultimately anonymization has some impact, because even though the bias may still be there further down the road, at least there's less, if you like, events to go past in order to give a shot. It's almost like the Rooney Rule over in the NFL, right? You've got to have a certain number of people at interview, and that seems to have a downstream impact in terms of numbers of hires. Not a direct correlation, but certainly there's more black coaches in the NFL than there have been before the implementation of the rule to say every time a head coach vacancy opens up, there has to be a candidate from an underrepresented population in at the interview stage. So, I think maybe little rules like that can help. Okay, we're running really short on time. I want to talk about the ethics of it again, just one more time, in terms of how advertising and sourcing, why is that different? So in other words, Facebook these days, you're not allowed to actively target with an advert based on demographic data for jobs, I believe. So it's no longer possible for me to send a job to a population based on a gender or ethnicity or anything of that type. I think that's a rule. So advertising needs to be like broad. And I think the idea behind that is that, we want to make sure everyone has a fair shot of seeing this. Therefore, we can't do a targeted advert against demographic data. Of course, the counter argument is, well, if that's the case, then we can't do the stuff we were talking about. We can't actively target the job for women candidates for engineering jobs, for instance, because it's going to go to a lot of men as well. Why do we think that it's okay to get rid of targeted ads, but it's not? It's different when we're doing targeted sourcing, isn't it? The same thing.
It's a different thing for sure, right? I mean, ads is one thing, and you can work on your ads. You cannot target a particular population any longer, but you can make sure that your language is inclusive. And then when we're sourcing, we have those filters that we can rely on, and that's a totally different story. You are reaching people who are not applying for jobs, who are not seeing your ads, right? We're letting them know there is a possibility.
Caroline, I think you're about to say something.
Yeah, in my opinion, it's two complementary actions, sorry, and I'm going to follow Arina's path. I think you can post an ad and display to a massive number of potential candidates, and then narrow it down later in your sourcing techniques. You can initiate point of contacts with underrepresented NGOs, for instance, which very often when they are represented on a large scale, they have local chapters, for instance. I'm thinking about Out in Tech, Queer GS, women in machine learning and data science, for instance. No matter what role you're wanting to feature in these ads, you have ways around that you can think of if you cannot narrow it down while publishing your ad.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting how this works. As some of the commentators have said, it's a fine line. Local knowledge, Caroline, I think you're absolutely right. That is a missing component a great deal. So maybe one of the things we need to talk about is also, how close the recruiter is to the demographic that they're trying to recruit from, that's going to give them additional advantage. If they knew, for instance, if they had a passion for this area, for instance, the NGO side or whatnot, they'll be able to tap into that information much more easily than someone who's coming at it from cold. Okay, we're well over time, folks. So we're going to have to leave it there. But before I leave, as always, we're going to try and say like a final comment. So Caroline, do you want to go? What is your kind of overall advice to companies when they're trying to tackle a diversity issue?
My initial piece of advice is always to challenge things you do. Accept to have failed in the past and to try new stuff. It's always like a new learning adventure. And I am reading a lot. I'm convinced that intersectionality is going to be the next D&I level, because you can narrow it down, to one minority. It can be added up to another one, but intersectionality is powerful. And especially in Europe, we are a little bit less familiar with the notion. And I think we should target that once diversity and inclusion will be more embodied, incarnated within companies.
How about you, Irina?
Well, one thing is take the diversity sourcing out of the emotional area. I mean, we stop the emotions. We all agree on diversity, period. Now we go and search for diversity indicators. And the second thing, we must include all diversity types. We cannot just sit on a couple types and think we're diverse.
Right, I think that's absolutely right, and there's a lot of less visible diversity components which get literally less visibility because it's we often do stuff that's the easiest to do, like
Right.
neurodiversity, classic example, right? Like how
Yep.
do you tell? Guillaume right at the beginning was saying this. Like, how is that unless it's self-declared on a resume? How do we actually know? We often don't. So yeah, this is a huge conversation, a huge challenge. Obviously, we can't achieve everything in one show, but I think we've had a fantastic conversation so far. So I want to thank you, Caroline and Irina, for sharing your words of wisdom. Thank you so much, you two.
Hi. Thank you.
Weren't they great? Okay, we're totally out of time, Marcello. So like this show needs to be longer than like 1 hour. Like we're already like nearly 90 minutes.
I think it's fine. There are some sort of items that can never be resolved in discussion, but getting these viewpoints in and seeing how people see the same problem, that's simply amazing. Don't make it longer.
Yeah, I think so. We've got to, I'm sorry for the time discipline, folks. Usually I do like, hey, share everyone's LinkedIn. In fact, let's do that now. There's still 48 people in the chat. So all of the 48 people still here. If you want to share your LinkedIn in the chat stream and continue the conversation with other people here, please do so now. I'm going to give it 60 seconds. So bang your LinkedIn in there and connect with the other people that are passionate about the topic. I think a big part of this, Marcellos, is also the idea that if we have enough conversations, or we kind of create spaces where this conversation becomes a thing, we'll simply be able to push forward a little bit more. It's all about making sure that we don't kind of have this as a subterranean thing, because that's when nothing gets solved. We need to kind of, keep a connection, deepen the network, keep the conversation flowing.
I think you're very right, Hunk. And like all things, first we have to recognize there is a problem. And then you can start talking about the problem, talking about solutions, experimenting with solutions, and figuring out how to solve it. And what you're doing now is raising awareness. And I'm going to say this, and sometimes I feel bad about saying, but we were lucky to have the pandemic, not in general, just for this specific thing, because it helped us move so much forward in terms of all these items we're discussing, like diversity, awareness, how we exclude people, how we should be more equal opportunity, how to treat people well remotely. We now have a much better understanding that things don't work, because if we were having the discussion 2 or 3 years ago, people would probably be saying, yeah, we're doing fine. There's no reason to change things.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, we have to see this period as an opportunity, despite obviously the tragedy of that's occurred. But it's given us time to pause and rethink and rebuild. So I think you're absolutely correct on that, Marcellos. Okay, that's about it, everybody. Thanks for being with us all this time. Please follow the channel if you want a part 2. We're going to talk about the psychology of unconscious bias. This is kind of a side step on what what we're talking about, but I think an even more interesting topic to review. So I will see you there all next week.
Thank you so much, Hung.